The Spongebob Squarepants movie is considered by many to be one of the best examples of a television cartoon making its way to the big screen, and to this day is still very well regarded by fans of the little yellow sponge. The sequel, the Spongebob movie Sponge Out of Water, however, is a bit more divisive in nature, as you got some who will argue that it was the best thing SpongeBob had made since the original SpongeBob movie, others who say it's only good in comparison to the last few seasons of the show up until that point, others who thought it was a complete return to form for SpongeBob SquarePants and something that needed to happen if the show were to survive, and others who just dismissed it as nothing but bad nonsense. But no matter what opinion one may have, pretty much the only thing that can be said for certain is that fans have a hard time agreeing on how good Sponge Out of Water actually is. And there's also a small group of people who actually believe the sequel to be quite good in nature, and might even say that as far as being an absurdist movie goes, it could even be considered a masterpiece. And today, I'd like to go over this rather different perspective and see if they actually have a point with it or not. And obviously there will be spoilers for both Sponge Out of Water and the original SpongeBob movie ahead. So in case you want to see either of them for yourself first, you might just want to come back to this video another day. Okay, so as I already noted, no matter what stance one has on Sponge Out of Water, there does seem to be one general consensus surrounding it: that it isn't as good as the original SpongeBob SquarePants movie. And even those who view Sponge Out of Water as an absurdist masterpiece are usually willing to concede this point as well. But here's the thing. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie is a much more traditionally made movie in nature. The villain goes to lengths he never has before to achieve his goals, actually succeeds, and the hero has to go on a journey of self-discovery that ultimately pays off in the end and allows him to save the day. Though this being SpongeBob, he manages to do all of this in, shall we say, a rather unorthodox fashion. But the point is, the SpongeBob SquarePants movie gets everything right in this regard, and is liable to make even adults shed a tear or two at times. Though, of course, what also helped the movie along was that all involved made it intending it to be the series finale, which allowed them to take risks with the story that they probably wouldn't have if they had known it would continue. But as I just said, in the end the movie was better off for it, as it allows the narrative to pack more of an emotional punch and make the stakes feel real, and just feels like the logical conclusion to the story of SpongeBob SquarePants. And all that being said, one thing the sequel, Sponge Out of Water, gets right is that it doesn't try to ride the first movie's coattails. Everything about it is completely different. The narrative, the tone, the moral, the structure, everything about it is as far away from the first movie as it can get. And this helps it both have an identity of its own, as well as not feel like a retread of ground that's already been explored. Instead of being a big cinematic event, Sponge Out of Water is almost treated like a feature-length episode of SpongeBob, and embraces that mentality full throttle, having no pretenses about the fact that this movie exists simply to give the audience a good time. And it's pretty much in this that some will argue for its worth. Because as I already explained in my video on the TV show Spongebob Squarepants, which you can find a link in the description to, SpongeBob was always meant to be something of an absurdist humor show in nature. And it's in this movie that aspect of Spongebob Squarepants gets to be used to its fullest potential, especially because this movie marked Steven Hillenburg's return to SpongeBob in almost 10 years. And as I noted in the aforementioned video, he was really well versed in absurdist humor. So having 10 years to come up with material and not being afraid to up the ante when it came to taking SpongeBob to strange places, the results are a movie that is decidedly weird. Now, some obviously found this extremely absurd take on SpongeBob off-putting, and that is understandable. Sponge out of water definitely isn't for everybody, but for fans of absurdist humor, it might just be one of the greatest uses of it out there. Because first off, the plot makes just enough sense to be able to tell its story without the audience getting confused. And that is a crucial aspect to absurdist humor, to be able to baffle your audience, but never confuse them. And the movie walks that fine line like a professional tightrope walker. And that's honestly where most absurdist movies fail. They usually end up becoming too confusing for the audience to follow. But as I just pointed out, this one never does. And another advantage it has over other absurdist movies is that it's also based off an existing brand, which makes certain things easier for the audience to understand right out of the gate. But even though the plot makes sense, the narrative still plays completely fast and loose with it. The secret formula disappearing, meaning that nobody's able to make Krabby Patties anymore, and society descending into a Mad Max-like dystopia, it's all completely nonsensical in a way that's both funny, yet at the same time also feels completely SpongeBob. And that's not even getting into the even more absurd moments the movie has to offer. A sequence where Plankton crawls inside SpongeBob's brain, the time travel scenes parodying 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the Space Dolphin. Especially the Space Dolphin. Once again, this movie feels as if it was made by people on 20 different types of drugs, and that's exactly what absurdist fans are apt to love about it. The plot is all over the place and pulls one strange, bizarre, and unexpected moment right after the other. And yet, it still manages to do all of that without the story ever getting lost. Because that's another thing about Sponge Out of Water. It's also much better written than most people give it credit for. I mean, obviously the jokes are pretty good, which other than the animation is usually where the movie is most praised, but there's also more to it than that. As I said in a previous video, you have to be smart to be able to write dumb effectively. And this movie is actually pretty intelligently written in its deliberate stupidity. And really, only a Spongebob Squarepants movie could take the basic plot of the Krabby Patty formula going missing and turning it into a dystopian apocalypse, time travel story, a children's movie about the importance of teamwork, an absurdist humor tale where the strange happens at every turn, a modern pirate movie, a storybook fantasy taken to its most logical extreme, and a superhero parody all rolled into one while still firmly set in the world of Spongebob Squarepants, and honestly feeling more like it than its own show had for a long time. And the fact that all of these different aspects are not only able to be held together, but actually work and still tell a pretty cohesive narrative at the same time speaks volumes about how well written this movie actually is. Again, it never takes itself seriously, which was the smart thing to do because that was the only way to play a movie like this and actually have it work. But to single out one example of how this movie is actually smartly written, just take a look at the premise itself. Think about it. The first movie was about Mr. Krabs' sworn enemy finally getting his hands on the Krabby Patty formula and taking over Bikini Bottom. So how do you go bigger than that for a standalone sequel? Have somebody else steal the Krabby Patty formula instead and drive Bikini Bottom to the brink, specifically because Plankton isn't responsible for it. And it's particularly effective because, believe it or not, the show had never really done anything like that before. Seriously, when you really look at it, for all the movie's nonsensical aspects, it actually fits together surprisingly well if you look at it close enough. Again, all of that just serves to make its various moments of absurdity even funnier and stranger, specifically because it actually comes from a well-written narrative. Alright, so long story short, the Spongebob movie, Sponge Out of Water, may not be all that great as far as traditional movie narratives go, but as an absurdist movie, it's about as good as it can get. And once again, this mainly comes from the fact that it's both intelligently written and actually has funny jokes to back up the many strange moments there are to be had. And once again, there's also the fact that the plot actually manages to stay intact and tell a coherent story all the way through, and that it went out of its way to differentiate itself from the original SpongeBob movie in every way possible were two other major points in its favor as well. And as far as many a SpongeBob fan was concerned, absurdity or not, the movie was still a very welcomed one, as after years of the show being subpar, it was just nice to see something that truly felt like SpongeBob again, even if it was a bit stranger in tone. So while it was never going to be hailed as the greatest movie ever, in the end it was ultimately everything it needed to be, and did a much better job at it than most ever expected at that. Okay, I think that's everything I had to say on that. So now I'd like to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that the Spongebob movie, Sponge Out of Water, is an unsung absurdist masterpiece? Or do you still believe it's nothing but a complete mess that was only made to entertain little kids? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And listen, you do not have to agree with anything I said in this video. You can feel any way you want to about Sponge Out of Water and its approach to absurdist humor, and if you think I've got it all wrong, that's absolutely fine. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.